Yeah. Wait, should we record this? Because I saw this on my feed and I was going to leave a comment and I saw your comment on it. And then I
Yeah.
didn't even end up leaving my comment.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay.
When you start your business, no one ever prepares you for what's in store. So finding someone else who just gets it is sometimes the thing that can keep you pushing towards those big vision board business goals.
We're turning our Zoom coffee chats into a weekly, unfiltered podcast. You always wanted to record them and repurpose them for content anyways. And that's on being a social media manager.
I'm Jessica Sheehy.
And I'm Madeline Daigan. And this is
hashtag
managed. I think it's perfect.
I like it. I like it. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Hashtag Managed. Welcome, Vanessa, to the show.
Hi.
Can you tell us a little bit more about you and how you got started as a branding and marketing strategist?
Yeah, so my story was not very linear. It was very much full of a ton of pivots. But I started in this space probably 10 years ago unknowingly. I had an online business and that was going great. I also had a corporate job and I worked those two simultaneously, kind of stopped in the online space and just focused more on the business. Then I had my son and stepped into photography. I just love documenting all of those stages. And as he grew, I just kind of organically went into like the motherhood space where I was documenting all those stages of motherhood. And I really loved it. Did that for about 5 years. And then we had my second. So I had always like the one thing that I said is I'm not going to be a stay-at-home mom. So like if we have another baby, I have to go back to work. And that was not the case. And what happened is that the daycare that my oldest was going to, we originally had my youngest set to go to, and they were like, we don't have him on the wait list anymore. I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And so I decided to stay home, but doing newborn photography in my studio space, which was also in my home, just didn't work. And I felt like I needed to pivot. And I had that prior experience with marketing and branding. And I was like, let me go into this space of working with businesses. And it quickly blew up on that end. But I was finding that brands needed more of a holistic approach rather than just needing the photography. Like everyone I would talk to is they thought they needed photos, but in reality, what they really needed was a whole overhaul and a clear understanding of what their brand was. And I was like, I can totally help you with that. And so once I found that space, it just clicked for me and everything just kind of went full speed. And so that's kind of my story.
So excited for this episode. Like, you have just said something that Jessica and I have like been saying to each other for the past few months now. So like just like with branding, because I'm like I'm ready to get into the like our topic today, but I'm like, okay, hang on, Maddie, hang on. Let's first ask you a few rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So to start, what would you say your favorite part of being a marketer is?
Helping people find that clarity within their business.
Such a good answer. And then a celebrity you'd love to meet.
Okay, I always forget his last name, but his name's Jonathan. I think it's Ramos, maybe. He's the main character on The Chosen. I can't ever remember his last name though.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. And then can't live without.
This is probably not the best answer, but Claude. So like ChatGTP. Like it's my favorite thing right now.
No judgment. And then in an alternate universe, what would your job be?
I feel like I would love to be a singer, but I can't sing. So hopefully in that alternate universe, I'm like amazing.
Same. And then your favorite brand.
Oh gosh, I was thinking about this. She doesn't align with like my overall like visual identity, but I just love who she is personally. Would probably be Jenna Kutcher, just because how authentic and real. Even though I don't know if authentic is the word, just she's just who she is. I know that's what authenticity means, but I feel like it's such a buzzword. She's just unapologetically her. So
Yeah.
yeah. I like that you said that kind of like as a a second definition to authenticity, because we've been talking a lot on the podcast about like founder marketing and how it's so
Mhm.
important. And I think so many people are so, I don't know if scared is the best word, but they don't ever want to lean into their own personal brand or what makes them them. And so
Mhm.
I love that you mentioned that that's why you do love Jenna, because she is who she is. Take it or leave
Mhm.
it. She's
Mhm.
either your cup of tea or she isn't. And
Mhm.
she's built a really big business and audience from sticking to that consistently.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's what drew me to her is the realness, which is what I think we all kind of preach, that like that will always be the number one thing that people gravitate towards is the relatability aspect of being you within your brand. But yeah, she's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, we're really eager to dive into this episode. And if you guys are listening, you can probably tell by the title that we're talking about a couple of different things from branding to pricing for a profit. So let's kick us off and let's start with the one thing that I think most people are just, it's taboo a little bit. No one ever really wants to talk pricing, money, all of the things. So we know that pricing is often a mindset game. What limiting beliefs do you see holding people back from charging their worth?
I would say the number one thing, and when I talk to, because I work with so many businesses in this space, is the comparison game. That like most people are ready to charge their worth, but they feel like, oh, this person over here is so much better than me, or I love exactly what they're doing, but I could never compare to it. And so they think I need to scale back and I can't charge what I actually need to be profitable. And so they just kind of stay in that space. And really, a lot of times they don't ever level up until they're like, I just cannot do this anymore. I have to. And my hope is always that we don't get to that point where we're just so burnt out and so fed up with our business. It's either quit or charge more. And that's usually what ends up happening is people are like, I can't do this. It's not sustainable. So they just quit.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna butcher this because I butcher every quote that I ever share
I
on
do
the
too.
podcast. But, but I have good intentions of why I always bring these quotes up. But there's people often always quit right before that major breakthrough, right
Yep.
before that really big win, that
Mhm.
really the biggest client you're ever going to sign to date, the press opportunity, whatever it is for your business and whatever industry you're in. People
Mhm.
often quit. And again, you don't that's life. You don't really know when that big moment is going to happen, but to get to that point where they have no other choice but to
Right.
quit or change their pricing. Or again, sometimes I think when it comes to pricing too, it's always better to be proactive than reactive. And
Mhm.
that can be said about anything I think in business,
Right.
but to think about it in a sense of, okay, where do you want to be next quarter, next year, 3 years, 5 years,
Mhm.
really thinking about the big picture planning versus like, okay, what do I need this month or next month? It's kind of like it's almost like a abundance versus like scarcity mindset as well
Mhm.
when it comes to pricing.
That's definitely how most people are when I speak to them. And they're already past that point that they could have been charging a long time ago. They just feel like, I better not, or I'll lose all my clients. Like there's so many things that fill their head. And most of it stems from the imposter syndrome, I feel like.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What are some quick wins or low cost strategies for elevating a brand's visual identity?
Yeah, I feel like most of this is almost like no cost, essentially. It's just more the understanding or like the time investment. But like going in and having a consistent brand. So the number one thing that I see most people doing is like switching up their visual identity no matter where they're at. So they'll do like a post and the next post looks completely different. Or like on their website, it doesn't match their social or like their newsletter, like all of these different things. It's just not consistent. And it's not even just the visual identity, right? Because that's what we're talking about. But like even the way they speak, it's just like this mismatch of a ton of information. Like it just doesn't look like the same thing across the board. So I would say like make sure it just matches so that people can recognize that like you want someone to see something that you're doing and think, oh my gosh, that's her or that's him. Like that's that business. I know it just by the post itself. Um, and the biggest ways you can do that is just staying consistent with like your brand colors, of course, don't choose any more than 5. I usually like to stick to 3, but like pick ones that match your audience, not what's trending. So you're picking something that is aligned. And when I say it's more time intensive, it's like research it. Research what color psychology goes in line with like your audience, not just because black and purple match the colors that you love. And then your typography. So like the fonts you use, those even have a there's psychology behind that as well. So elevating those, being consistent with all of those. So those would be like, even though those aren't 3 separate things, those are like 3 things that you could do immediately that would elevate your brand. I would go into photography, but like that's expensive. So if you could only do 3 things, it's be consistent, use colors and fonts that match what your audience is looking for.
You're speaking my love language right now. Honestly.
That's so funny.
Yeah, Maddie is our resident graphic designer, and when this episode is airing, we are probably a week, maybe a week and a few days out from launching our rebrands for not only the podcast, but also for our social media agency, which is really exciting, but also very scary. But we're trying to take a page out of our own book when it comes to all things marketing. And it was just time, for that up level. I know this isn't really a question that we kind of prepared, but Vanessa, in your eyes, do you think there's is there any indicator or sign when that there should be an up level in like a rebrand or branding? Because I want to say branding too, because I think a lot of times we probably have all kind of encountered our fair share of clients who quote unquote have a brand, and if you're watching, you guys are seeing my air quotes. But that might be just like a loose Canva brand or pre-made pre-purchased logo. But is there any indicators in your eyes for when that time has come?
I would say when you are at a point, when you are ready to like up your pricing, that's a huge indication, because people will pay what they view. I'm trying to figure out how to say this. People will pay what they determine your worth is. Like that, I don't want that to sound bad, but like, I feel like I need to restructure that.
No,
Like,
I actually loved that. I actually love that. No, I seriously unapologetic. Like I love that. Because I know where you're coming from too. But I feel like when I was going through this rebrand for all the for the podcast, for the agency, and our blog, like I could tell because like I had to like view Jessica as my client, right? Whereas like okay, like and going into your color psychology and all of that, but I could tell too, it was like Jessica was like ready to up level, and like we were ready to up level the podcast too. So I actually like love that
okay,
answer. Sorry. Whereas like if you want to add on to that, please do. I didn't, but I was like, no, I think that is like the best answer ever because I think it's so true.
yeah. Well, people will pay what they think that you're worth in the sense of
Yeah.
if you have this brand and it just is like, well, here's another example. Maybe this will help the case. So if you were to walk into a Mercedes dealership and all of the cars were like $10,000, you would be like, wait, that's not what I align with. Like the perception I have of this brand is that it's a high-end great brand, but why are the cars so cheap? People will have to kind of equate the two. And if they're going to spend more, they have to feel like it's going to be worth the investment. So a lot of times people think branding is just that visual aspect of it, and it's not. It's the overall experience that you're providing to your clients. And so there's so many other components other than the visual identity, but like the number one thing they see right away is your visual identity. And so if they don't perceive it as something that's worth the investment, they're going to essentially walk away or like question it because it's like, well, is this person, if they're not going to invest within this and it doesn't match, what I'm experiencing as a client, it's probably not going to be worth the investment. So that's like the number one thing you can do right away is up level that visual identity and the perception for your clients. But overall, I think that's just I think that answers your question.
No, I also, one of my favorite questions to ask a client again, since I have like the graphic design background though,
Mhm.
is when a client will hand over their brand and I'll be like, "So where's your branding guide?
Yeah.
Like where's your branding that you and I like we all know. And if you don't, that like welcome. Welcome to the podcast. Like we're here to educate you. Where your brand deck is going to have, you know, the brand voice, your story, your mission, your taglines.
Mhm.
It's going to have like the typography, the color palette. But again, I think where as social media managers, I see oftentimes see that frustration because it's like you have clients who are expecting you to be the graphic designer, be the brand designer,
Mhm.
brand manager essentially. And it's like, no, these are all different.
Yeah.
It's nice when you can have them all under your belt, but
Yep.
I, sorry, I'm just geeking
No,
out.
that's very that's very true. I also think that people don't understand the difference between a brand refresh and completely rebranding. So a lot of times people think that they need to completely do an overhaul and they need to change their logo and they need to change every aspect of their brand. And they're like, I'm rebranding, but really what they're doing is just refreshing their brand. Um, and just elevating the messaging and some of the font, you know, the typography, all of those things. They're just elevating slightly, not completely going and changing every element of their business. So I think that's another thing that people
Yeah.
kind of confuse.
Yeah, like it doesn't have to be as extreme. There could be, like you said, there, and I think it maybe it's different stages of where they're at in business or kind of where they're pivoting or repositioning. You know, maybe you just need a little bit. Like I love that you use the word up level because I think that's what it is exactly. Like it's adding a few more elements or a few more pieces to the brand, but it's really just up leveling the overall experience that like your customers or clients are going to endure, which
Right.
I think is really important. Which I think is a really good thing that kind of plays a little bit into our next question in terms because we've talked about a little bit that it's not just the visual brand identity. It's so much more. It's the messaging, it's the tone, it's the voice, it's you know, the mission, the vision of the business. So Vanessa, we'd love to know from your opinion, what role does storytelling play in building and engaging build an engaging brand online? That was a tough
Yeah.
question. That didn't easy.
So a lot of times, well, the best example I like to use is like when you are in the online space, it doesn't have to be online, but I'll just use this as an example. When you're in the online space, nowadays we're so inundated with all of these things that are like pick me, right? Like you have advertisements here, somebody wants you to buy this and do this. It's just constant. And the number one differentiator is to get people out of that mindset is obviously providing a a solution to the need that they have. And a lot of times, because we filter out so much information in our minds, we like block it out. And when you can tell a story, people tend to kind of process that a little bit easier. It's easier for them to be like, oh, I can see myself in this, or that relates to me and it actually solves a problem that I have. Let me listen a little bit longer. And I mean, we've all grown up with like our parents telling us stories when we read books or like, you know, we watch TV and that has a clear storyline. It has a theme, a plot, it has characters, all these things. And so all around us, if we want something to pay attention to, it's generally a story. And so when you are, I think a lot of times business owners think like, oh, I have to tell my story, like my story from when I started. And that's great. You want to incorporate that, but like help your clients visualize themselves in whatever it is that you're trying to promote. Um, and I think a lot of times people just they kind of take it too literal and they're like, let me just tell my story again and again and again. And that's not what it means.
Instead of like adding on to this, like the lessons I learned from that
Yeah.
time to like add on to, yeah. Oh,
Mhm.
I love
Yeah.
that answer.
And I like your point too around putting your audience in that story
Mhm.
themselves, where, you know, I know it's not applicable to absolutely any and every business and brand, but a lot of times like we are our audience or our ideal client or customer or however that looks for our business at most likely like an earlier stage in life, like
Right.
prior to having this solution, prior to having, this fix from this product or what have you. And so it's a really good way to just write, so many people tell me all the time. It's one of our biggest things. Well, one, the time suck of just social media and marketing, but I think the second biggest thing is people are always like, I'm not a good writer. I'm not creative. And I think everyone is creative in their own way.
Mhm.
I think we all as humans are creative just by nature, and that looks different for everyone.
Right.
But I think everyone can be a great writer because you just have to pull out those good stories, those good ideas from within that, again, I think that's what makes marketers so great because we can pull those out of our clients.
I think the biggest thing is that, like, to kind of play on what you've said about people thinking that they're not good storytellers, I think most of it stems from you having to know what your audience wants. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to get ahead of myself because I'm like, "Oh, I love this." So, I'm huge on finding clarity within your business, right? Like, that's my number one thing that I start with in everything. And when you're clear on who you are, because you started your business from a problem that you saw, and I would say 90% of the time it's because it's a problem you experienced and you wanted a solution to that. And so we often forget that we are our best ideal audience, and we can really tap into the mindset of what our audience wants on a deeper level. And it becomes easier to tell those stories because you know your audience inside and out, and you know what they are struggling with, what they want to hear. And I think most of the time people don't know what story they want to tell because they're not super clear on what their audience wants. And the reason why I start with clarity is because when you are really clear on all of those things, it makes it so much easier for you to identify every element of your business, because you're like, well, I just know my audience loves this, so I'm going to create that. Or like they want to know, this story, or they're struggling with that. That's a really long way of saying just know your audience, and then it will help become easier for you to create. So,
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. How can businesses create a strong value proposition that justifies premium pricing?
oh, how can they create one? I think it's having a clear understanding of what makes them different from anyone else. So automatically we were created with our own different set of life experiences. We have, past careers, we have unique talents and gifts and all of those things. Those automatically make us different. We bring such a unique perspective to every element of our business that I think a lot of times when we're creating our value proposition, we forget to incorporate those, or we're so close to ourselves or our own genius that we forget, like, oh, that is actually what makes me different, is my own unique perspective on things. So I think that's a huge element that you could incorporate on that end of things. And then just clearly defining what solution you provide to your audience. So I'm different from this person, and this is how I help you um, with whatever product, service, whatever they're selling. So,
Yeah, I like that. I like that kind of formula too, to figure out what that is. I feel like that's a good, like, actionable thing for anyone who doesn't yet, who hasn't defined what their value proposition is.
yeah, I
Like,
feel like that's a hard one. Value
yeah,
proposition.
yeah, it is. It really is. Being a social media manager can feel like folding a fitted sheet while you're trying to explain at the family reunion what it is you actually do online, but you don't have to do it alone. The hashtag Managed Collective Mentorship is your weekly dose of business strategy, advice, and let's be honest, therapy. Grab your lunch, hop on our weekly lunch break coaching calls with myself and Maddie, and let's figure out how to thrive in this wild social media management world. Sign up now at hashtagmanaged.com/mentorship. Use code MANAGED for 20% off your mentorship. That's MANAGED. Join us now at hashtagmanaged.com/mentorship. We'll see you there at the next lunch break therapy sesh. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you made it this far, I think we've officially become internet besties. You can always call into the hashtag hotline and say hello, leave a review, or ask your burning questions.
Make sure you follow, rate, and review the podcast wherever you're listening from. Subscribe to the Social Club newsletter for our weekly email, and shoot us a DM over at #managed on Instagram, letting us know what your biggest takeaway was from this episode.